Lesson 23, moving along. We're almost halfway through. Going from last week's lesson, how did the 10 plagues, based on last week's lesson, how did the 10 plagues impact the belief system of the Egyptians? Or how did it interact with the belief system of the Egyptians? Kind of highlighted this last week. Jesse?
Pretty much nailed every one of their gods.
Nailed a lot of their gods. I mean, definitely each plague would have correlated with an Egyptian god, and the plague would have come, and the Egyptians would have said, we need to pray to our God that is in charge of this thing. And what they saw very openly was it's not working. The plague started when the Hebrews said their God was going to start it, and it ended when we asked the Hebrews to ask their God to end it. None of our petitions to our God did anything. Over and over and over and over. That is what happened with those plagues. And God says it explicitly later on, hey, I showed myself supreme over the gods of the Egyptians. It comes up later on, but he explicitly says that. That's what I was doing there, was showing myself as more powerful than their gods. Mm-hmm. What is the only thing that would save a Hebrew family from being judged along with the Egyptians during the Passover? Everybody mumbled it. Somebody say it. Blood on the doorpost, right? They had to put the blood of the lamb, right? The blood of a lamb would go on the doorpost. They would pass through the blood of the lamb, and that is the only way that they would be saved from the judgment. And God said it very clearly. Go through the blood of the lamb, and you stay in there. And if you come out, that's actually going to put you under the judgment. Like, this is the way that you're saved, is going through the blood of the lamb, which, I mean, just that statement is just like foreshadowing with a capital F, right? Like, that is, God is setting things up for later on, the message he's going to have. Only by believing what God had said and doing what he'd said would they be saved, believing God. The God of the Hebrews was relatively unknown to the Egyptians before the plagues, right? That's what Pharaoh says. Who's your God? Like, what's this about? How do we know that had changed by the end of the 10th plague? What did we see in the story that we know that this is no longer a mystery to them, the God of the Hebrews? What happened there towards the end?
That they let them go.
They let them go.
And gave them everything they wanted to go with.
Gave them everything. We're right there.
Some of them actually asked to go with them.
A whole bunch of people went with them. They said that, hey, we Egyptians are jumping ship. We're going to follow these guys.
I'd have been one of them. I didn't realize that.
A whole rabble, it says. And again, that phraseology would imply it wasn't two guys. It was like the Israelites start moving out, this mass of people is moving out, and a bunch of people are tagging on, saying, we're with you guys. We're just hightailing out of here as well. Your God has proved himself superior to everything we have here. We're going with you. That was a big deal. Not all the Egyptians, and not everybody is like bowing the knee to God here, but a significant portion, enough that it gets noted in that way. And we know that, right up to Pharaoh, he's been beat down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. All right, so that brings us up to that'd be Exodus 12:38 would be where we saw that rabble leaving with them. So going into today's lesson, we're getting on to miracles. We've seen the plagues. We've seen God working. I mean, God has not been shy about his power and his abilities up to this point as he's revealed himself in Scripture. We are going to get up to some very specific miracles, and it's worth noting, as we get into this, we know that God is a God of order. We see that as he presents himself, God sets up laws of nature. Right? God puts things in motion that he expects to stay in motion. He says, I put the sun, the moon, and the stars up there to guide the seasons and to regulate, the cosmos. I've set up a clock, and it's going to keep on functioning. He doesn't have to sit there and okay, moon, now you're going to go to this phase, and now he's like, I've set it up. Things are going to be going on as I've designed them to do that. We call it a natural law. And we as humans, especially in the Western world, we have done a pretty good job of finding out what are some of those laws. Right? That's the scientific method. I'm gonna do a test, and then I'm gonna really watch what's going on. I'm gonna write down my results, and I'm gonna see what's going on. And this is actually a thing. This is consistent. I've discovered a law of nature, gravity. Things of larger mass are going to actually pull towards themselves, and we call it gravity, right? Earth has its gravity, the moon has less gravity, there's less mass. We're like, look, mass pulls towards itself. A law of nature. Water flows downhill. A law of nature. Like, we see these things, we're like, that's cool. We discovered something that's always true, and we're kind of still discovering laws of nature, things that God has put into place. Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a good thing, and where we would err a little bit, and just to give us an awareness, as a culture, we would tend to say, look at these things that we've discovered, and we tend to elevate them maybe to a too high of a degree sometimes as we're engaging with a story like this. This is how the laws work, and so now God has to fit on, like, the laws are the laws of everything, right? And God's like, well, actually, I'm telling you the story. I'm the one who made the laws. I'm above the laws. We just did our game time. We have a little homeschool group that we do during the week, and we do our gym class here one day a week. I did a bunch of relays and stuff yesterday, or not yesterday. What day was it? Friday. We got together, and so I set up the rules for the kids. Like, okay, in this game, here's how the rules are going to go. And then because they're little homeschool kids and they've learned to question adults, we're doing the rules and stuff. And it's like, okay, and now we're changing it. And I changed the rule for the relay that we're doing. Question, Mr. Seth, I thought the pins, like, we weren't supposed to knock down the pins. Well, you're right. I have stepped in as the authority. I've changed the rule. I've changed how this is going to go for this thing here. I can do that because I am the one who makes the rules. I am the one who makes the laws in this situation. Therefore, the law has changed here. That is how God presents himself in Scripture, is that, hey, there are things going on. I also have the ability to step into my natural order, and I can tweak things because I'm the guy who made that. Like, I'm the one that said water flows downhill. I'm going to make water do something different. I can do that. I'm the one who told water to do the thing in the first place. But our cultural worldview doesn't like that. We struggle with that. We don't like the idea of things moving outside of the rules that we have here. We tend to maybe put too much value on the rules just because that's
We
rules
like to
that we
think
have.
that we understand the rules, and therefore we are masters of our little universe.
Yeah, and we often do understand the rules, which I think is great. I really value when we figure stuff out. It's pretty crazy when you discover something that's like, well, look, this has been going on all along. We didn't know it, and now we do get this. But just something to keep in mind as we engage with the story, and as maybe we go through the information, like, is that really true? Is that really? I don't know. We're not the first guys to struggle with this, right? The Sadducees, back in Jesus' day, there was already a sect of the Jewish people that said, hey, we believe the Bible to be true, except for all the miracles. That's not true. Except for that little bit of the miracles. That part's not true. That part is figurative, flowery language. No, but everything else is good. So there was a group of Jews already at Jesus' time, and the Romans, they had the Hellenists, different people. That people have struggled the idea of miracles right along. It's a human thing. We would struggle with that. We, as Americans, are going to struggle a little bit with some of the stories here. And it comes up, any research you do on this, that you see people struggling with the idea. And I'll just say again, like before, the struggle is not because the Bible is confusing. It's we just are coming with some baggage. We're coming with some issues like, the Bible says this. I don't want to believe that. That causes problems for me. It makes my head hurt a little bit, trying to make what I currently believe fit with what the Bible's saying. So we tend to then say, well, the Bible must be saying something different. What we'll see in the story, it's just not. It's a clear story.
Yeah.
So something to keep in mind as we go, because if Genesis 1 is true, right, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, and he did everything that he says he did in Genesis 1. This story is fine. This story makes sense, and I'm not going to struggle anymore. When I start coming from my Western worldview and saying, okay, how can I take all the things that my culture says I should be believing, and I superimpose it over this, now I've got a problem that I'm gonna struggle to try to make sense of
apply
this.
the scientific order to miracles, and our brains kind of...
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if when we're someday able to stand before God and we say, hey, how did you do this? God might be able to just say, oh, these are the actual physical things. This is how I did it, and it's unknown to me now. I think I've told you guys before when we presented a weed whacker to the ISKI for the first time. That was like super cool, because I'm explaining this little string is going to cut all of this grass. And they're like, impossible. Seth, we love you. You're a very intelligent man. Sorry, what you're saying is foolishness. You don't know how grass works. You need a knife. You need like metal, not a little plastic string. Like, just watch. And then, their minds are blown. Whoa! And then they're just like all on board. And that's not, lowly ISKI. That's like, no, that's all of us. That humanity is there. We know everything until like, oh man, holy cow. Okay, now we know everything. This is how it works. I think some of these miracles, God's like, yeah, this is how I did it with physics and all this stuff. Like, oh, that was super cool. Or maybe he just, did the little kid thing where he's like, new rule. Like, I'm just doing. Nope, there's actually no good explanation in your current reality that would make sense of this, but hey, I'm God. I don't know. But we'll pick up the story.
I'm tending towards that one.
I think it's cool that the more science progresses, some of this other stuff just works. I think that's awesome. Exodus 13:17 is where we'll pick up the story. My longest intro yet. Now we're finally getting to 20 minutes later. We're getting to the Bible. Exodus 13:17. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Thus the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. And that road to the Philistine territory, that archaeological digs and stuff would say, there's a bunch of Egyptian forts going along that. That would be the main highway. They're going to be hitting a bunch of Egyptian fortress things. Jump to 13:21. The Lord went ahead of them. He guided them during the day with a pillar of cloud, and he provided light at night with a pillar of fire. This allowed them to travel by day or by night. And the Lord did not remove the pillar of cloud or pillar of fire from its place in front of the people. So God had said that he would free them, right? God said, I will free you. I will bring my people out of Egypt. And now God is the one going before them. God is leading them out of Egypt. Moses is there, right? Moses is present. Moses is working. But it's actually God in a visible form going before them, which is kind of cool because up until this point, God has been speaking through Moses, but all the Israelites have seen is Moses. And they've seen the acts of God, right? They've seen the plagues. This is the first time that God is kind of showing up in something that they could look at like, oh, our God is in that cloud. Our God is over there, and our God is leading us. That's kind of a cool thing. God is giving them that visual idea, right? He's presenting himself to the people. You will know who Yahweh is. Now you know Yahweh is over there. We're literally following Yahweh out into the wilderness. Kind of a cool thing there. God's really taking them on a journey there with him. Like, hey, I'm going to introduce myself to you. Now he's giving them a visual, which is important for us people. We really struggle with just conceptual stuff. We like to see things. All right, go to Exodus 14:5. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done, letting all those Israelite slaves get away, they asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. And then he's going to go to verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." Little bit of rewriting history there. That wasn't always their response. But I thought it was interesting when you see, well, a couple things there. You see Pharaoh's response. He'd seen God's power, right? Mm-hmm. He more than anyone else, because he was the one Moses was communicating to. God says, let my people go, and if you don't, this will happen. Then that thing happens. And Pharaoh has to beg Moses, please ask your God to take that away. And then he does it. So 10 times we see, I guess 9 times it gets taken away, and then the 10th time it's just done. So Pharaoh has seen God's power. He knows who God is. There's no question there. And yet he's not submitting, right? And so there's that idea, there's kind of this idea, well, with apologetics or something, maybe I can convince someone to believe God. I can convince someone to be a follower of God. No, that's not how it works. Someone could be completely convinced of God and his power and his authority and still not bend the knee to God. That's a thing that can happen. It's a thing that did happen in Pharaoh's life, and it's something that's a human quality. We have that ability, like, no, I will not believe what you're saying. I won't. You cannot change my mind on this. That is on display there in the life of Pharaoh. And you look at the people's response to this this issue, right? They've also seen miracles. They've also attributed these things to God. They've seen the Passover. Like, that just happened probably within like a week of what we're talking about here. It was hard to get the time frames, definitely under a month. We know for sure. They've been gone for a little bit, but the Passover just happened where they were all saved. Israel they all lost all their firstborn. Now they go out, and look what they do here and how they're looking at the situation. They're yelling at Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you we didn't want to do this? Leave us alone." Like, they're yelling at Moses. "Moses, what's wrong with you? Moses, why did you do this to us?" It's kind of interesting. They're accusing Moses. They're following this cloud. Well, they're kind of following Moses. They're kind of both there in their mentality. But Moses told the people, verse 13, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you have seen today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." "Moses, what's wrong with you? Moses, why are you leading us to our death? What? We told you we didn't want to go." Hey, calm down. Sit tight. You're going to watch. God is going to save you. God is going to be the one that steps in here. We're following God. We're following Yahweh. Like, what are you yelling at me for? I mean, this is kind of interesting because you see, like, that's what he told the people, and they must have been talking a little bit different to God, because in verse 15 here, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me?'" So he's like, "Hey guys, calm down. God's going to do it." "God, what's going on?" But the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground." I kind of thought that was funny because he led them, right? I guess I skipped over the part. In chapter 14 early on, I skipped it for time-wise, but now I'm going back, undoing all of my efforts.
Yeah.
Okay, in 14:2, "Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by Wow, there's a word.
Pi-ha-hi-ro.
How did you know that?
I watched the documentary about
Not
it.
even reading it, he knows that. Pi-ha-hi-ro, between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore across from Baal Zephon. Then Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness." It wasn't just Pharaoh that thought. They were confused and trapped in the wilderness. Go over here where you're locked in between the pursuing army and a massive sea, right? And no, we just got to go afterwards, John. Write it down. And there is the question, is this the Red Sea or is this the Sea of Reeds? The Hebrew would be, it could go either way. The Greek, the New Testament, when it refers back to this, the language that's used would specify more that it was the Red Sea. The way that the Greek reads, it would be the Red Sea. In the Hebrew, it could be the Sea of Reeds, which could have been a smaller saltwater lake north of the Red Sea. It could have been that. Either way, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we say the Red Sea, maybe it's something close by. We do know it was a large body of water. It was something deep. It was something significant. It was something you looked at and said, we can't get across that. Like, it was a definite barrier.
I'll give you.
But God's response to Moses, "Hey, tell people to get going." Okay, there's kind of some water, God. Go ahead to verse 19, 14:19. "Then the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and Israelite camps. As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and the Israelites did not approach each other all night." So I tend to, in my mind, I tend to shrink this down. So it's like there's a small group of Israelites, and then there's this little group of chariots stuff. We're talking about a large, two and a half million people on one side. The Egyptians coming with less than 2.5 million people. So there is that'd be a traditional way. You get close to the enemy and you kind of, okay, now let's figure things out. What's our battle plan and stuff? I think it's kind of funny. It says that this wall of fire lands between them, but they didn't approach each other. I would have said, so they didn't approach each other. Like, I would be like, pause, let's get together. Our map, our attack plan didn't have a wall of smoke and fire in play here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going on. And again, you just see God didn't have to do this, right? He could have done whatever, but a visual display of, I have led you out of Egypt, and now I am going behind you, and I am protecting you from this threat coming behind you. But God moving with that, all the people could see, okay, Our God just moved behind us as a visual aid to what's going on here. So now they're at this point. Judgment, punishment, problems coming from behind, right? They're a total threat. They're trapped, stuck between an army and a wet place, right? There's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do here, and they recognize it, and that's why they're freaking out at Moses. We're going to die. We have no options, zero options. What do we do? The only thing they can do is complain or look to God, right, and say, hey, God has to save us.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go ahead and read through here. Then Moses raised his hand, in verse 21, over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. So there are recorded instances of strong wind blowing and it moving 5 to 7 feet of water miles back, where there used to be a sea, and it moves back. It's just not there anymore. It was in the 1800s. The guy was in a camp. It's totally just happened. That's not what's described here. Like, there are instances of like, oh, other people said like, oh, well, if there was a volcanic explosion hundreds of miles away, it would have caused that tsunami, which would draw the water back, and then it would come with force. Sure, that's cool. It's a thing that happens. There's a natural explanation there. That it is not what is described here. What's described here over and over and over is, so the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. That's a phenomena that we cannot explain. That's something that for all of the, oh, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like this. There's nothing that matches that.
Well, it does say there's a wind.
There is a wind. I would say so. That it's an impressive thing. There's a strong wind, and it is forcing the water up, but in a way that we cannot explain. This isn't a water spout. This isn't a hurricane. This isn't a volcano. This is not just a normal typhoon. This is a God thing. This is God stepping in. This is just a straight up miracle, as the Bible presents it, and what we'll see is it is always referred to in this way. It wasn't like, oh, here's a little bit of flowery speech that was taken out of context, and we think of it like this. Like, no, the Bible always presents it as being an act of God that defies what could have been happening normally there. Pretty cool. I mean, to look at it like in that context, what's happening here? Again, this is a big deal. This is something that stood out to everyone, and actually this gets referenced over and over and over throughout the Old Testament as one of the biggest miracles that was ever done for the people of Israel was this. This was a cataclysmic sort of event going on. Exodus 14:23, to keep it moving. They're passing through on dry ground. And again, slow the story down. I read it, I'm like, paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. So I'm like, in a half hour, the Egyptians are there, and it's like this action scene of like, Egyptians, dust, fire, God comes down, the thing opens, they run through, and then it's like, okay, it takes time to move people. All night the wind was blowing, it opened the thing up, they start leaving in the morning, they're trekking, the Egyptians start coming. This did take some time.
Mm-hmm.
This is the summary of it. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again. Then the water will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers. So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Yeah, let's keep going. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. All of the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, again, those who believed God, saved from judgment. Those who believed God and went through his one way to be saved, they were saved. The ones who believed God and went through were saved. The ones who did not believe God were destroyed. Would be a simple summary of that event. And remember, there were believing Egyptians amongst the Israelites, right? So the Egyptians who were believing God and went through his one way of salvation in this situation were totally saved. Saved along with all the Israelites there who were believing. And then those who did not were swept away, literally swept away,
in that judgment. And then 30 and 31 just summarizes the whole event there. That is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians that day. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Kind of a cool thing. Not how they started the story, right? They didn't start with hardly any faith in the Lord. They said, okay, God's done cool things for us in the past. I have no expectation that he's going to actually do it like that. They saw, oh, difficulty? We're done. There's nothing God can do. I mean, they don't say that, but it seems there in their actions. Now they're at a point where their faith has grown a little bit. They've seen a bit more of who God is. They've seen a bit more of his provision, and they're saying, wow, okay, the God that we're serving is a capable being. This is an all-powerful God. The plagues, that was cool. This, more acute, more of I just saw God part the sea, we went through, and then he destroyed. Like, the thing that saved us just destroyed our enemies. Like, this is a God who completely had control here. I will save these people, now I will destroy these people. And remember, the charioteers, this is the elite force of Pharaoh's army. So these are their oppressors, right? These are the people that kept them enslaved. The reason they didn't leave slavery was because of these guys. If you try to leave, my army, who are amazing, will destroy you. You are captive because of these people. They literally just saw their captors destroyed by their God. I mean, it was, not only did he free us, he beat them. Like, we're seeing all their dead bodies. Like, it was awesome. These are the tanks of the day, right? We know these are like an elite fighting force. It was the best tech they had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, really cool there. And then we have in Exodus 15, 8. So then they sing this long song. It just retells the whole thing. But again, we just see in a verse, I like this passage here in their song. They're singing to the Lord after seeing this awe-inspiring act. They say, at the blast of your breath, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood straight like a wall. In the heart of the sea, the deep waters became hard. The enemy boasted, I will chase them and catch up with them. I will plunder them and consume them. I will flash my sword, my powerful hand. I will destroy them. I will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Again, an exact retelling of what it said. They went through, and God made the waters stand up like it was a hard wall. Mm-hmm. Like, that was incredible. And then you swept away these guys. But what they're talking about here is a miracle. And it was something God did for the nation of Israel. Very impressive. So we have that. There's the birth of the Israelite nation, and it's kind of cool. This was a major event in the birth of the nation. And in Acts 10, when Stephen is talking, oops, I went too, sorry.
No, I'm not.
Different Stephen.
Not that old.
I said Acts 10. I think it was actually Corinthians 10. Yeah, okay. It was actually 1 Corinthians 10, not Acts, my bad. In 1 Corinthians 10:2, so Paul, writing to the Corinthians, he's just referencing this story, because it gets referenced a lot. In the cloud and in the sea, all of them were baptized as followers of Moses. Just talking about this kind of event. We'd say baptism, is when you are identified to a cause. Like, people would hear John the Baptist say, oh, I identify with this message. I want to be counted as a follower of this teaching. I'm going to be baptized into this thing. And then we do that as Christians. We're baptized into the teaching of Jesus. Paul looks at this and he says, hey, this is where the Israelites, they were baptized into their place here as children of God, as his chosen nation. This is like a symbolic thing. They went under the water, and they came out on the other side, and now they are the autonomous nation of Israel as a people. And it says they're following God in this. They have this faith in God, faith in Moses, and who they are as a people, right? We're no longer the slaves of Egypt. We are the free people. We are God's people over here now on the other side of the Red Sea. And that was through the Red Sea. We kind of see that being exemplified, or an example being made of that. Okay, so now we can jump to 16. A little bit of time has passed, so there was a high there. That was a good moment for Israel. Lots of endorphins going on. They're excited. They're happy. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin. And that is, again, that's just the name. It doesn't mean anything to do with morality. It's sin, Sinai. That's all that's being said there. It's the name. They journeyed into the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. Personally, probably the answers are there. I had trouble with the timeline, and I kind of just said, okay, I put enough time into this. How long this is exactly after the Red Sea, I don't know. It's a month since they left Egypt. We know that. So I think it's still fairly fresh. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There, too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you've brought us into this wilderness to starve us to death. So, there's that.
Human nature asserting itself.
Again, human nature. Yeah, we're very quick to forget God's blessings and provisions. And I really try, personally, because I don't know, growing up, these guys, the Israelites in the Old Testament and the Pharisees in the New Testament, I feel like we as Christians have a tendency to say, look at those idiots, look how bad, like how dumb can you be, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, I don't want to do that because then I'm no longer really benefiting from the story, because to point out that someone else's faults doesn't really do anything for me. If I look for a relatable thing here, yeah, I see this in my life. It's one of the things I've tried to do and incorporate lately is when I start my prayers, because often, you've seen our prayer time, hey, what do we have to talk to God about? Here's all the things that I'm discontent with, or I'm fearful of, or I have, here's the things that I need help with. And I'm like, okay, before I get to my list with all the things which are good to talk to God about, and I'm not against it at all, it's a good thing. Before I get to that, God, what have you already done for me up to this point? Can I take a little bit of time and just start with thanking God for things? And just start listening, okay, God, what are some things that, just to get my head in the right space? And one of the reasons I try to do that is because I don't want to be like these guys, right? That's so focused on, problem, man, my life sucks. Like, okay, wait, I literally just had amazing miracles done for you. But in my own life, I have this tendency. I can do this, and it's something we want to watch on. So before we start mocking them too much, let's try to relate to it where we can and learn from it, because this is, again, human tendency. This is a man thing. This is how we engage with life often, is negative things we really notice that, and then a super positive thing we can forget about so quickly. And it's silly, honestly, when we do that, but it doesn't seem silly at the time. God responds to them. Exodus 16:11. Again, read the story in its entirety. It's great. I'm just going to kind of move through it here. Then the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. If it was me, I've heard the Israelites' complaints, and I'm going to smite them, because I'm a little bit sick of this. But God says, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord, your God. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp, and the next morning the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And the what is it, the term would be manna. That's what that means. If it was...
You would call it whatchamacallit.
Yeah, the Iski would say, what is that?
Manna.
Manna's a lot shorter, so I'm glad we got that. Yeah. Right. And to know they didn't deserve this food, right? They didn't deserve this. God didn't say, I've heard them beseeching me. I've heard them coming in humility before me in a worshipful manner. I've heard them come and express their dependence on me, and I've given them manna. It's like, no, I've heard their complaints. I've heard their grumbling and whining and discontentment and disbelief, and I'm providing manna and quail. That's what I'm doing. So you see God's grace here. He is so good.
He's patient.
He was with us when we don't deserve blessing, and he gives us blessing.
Yes, again, this is a very common human-God interaction where God looks good. We do not. And how we interact with him often. And what's cool is if you jump to verse... where is that guy? Of course, I won't be able to find it. 35. Because it talks a bunch about the manna. We're going to kind of jump. But 16:35. So the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they arrived at the land where they would settle. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. This was one of those. This was a miraculous event. Again, unprecedented. And like it hasn't happened before. It hasn't happened since. But they had food on the ground for them every single day. This was one of those miracles that kept on going for them. Really cool. God doing that and God giving them his grace. An undeserved meal, right? That he's doing for them. Especially when we get to the rest of the story of their interactions with him. All right, so go ahead and jump to 17. So now this has been going on for a little bit. Again, still early on. We're still within, I think, the first 2 months of them having left Egypt. Again, I did get a little bit lost when I was trying to do the chronology thing. I know we're early on still. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin, and they moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. "Quiet," Moses replied. "Why are you complaining against me, and why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They're ready to stone me." So I thought this was, it stood out to me just having read the manna thing. So they woke up that morning, they gathered their miracle bread, they ate their miracle bread and said, "Dang, I'm thirsty. God, why won't you?" It's like, okay, come on.
Is this the time I'm thinking of?
Wait, what?
Is this the time I'm thinking of?
If it's the one, probably.
When the only water around was poisonous water.
Nope, that was it. We skipped that one. That was a different one. This one, there's no water, so they're there. But again, the same principle. Holding they've got their because it's not. He said, "Gather up your manna for the day," right? So they've got their miracle bread in their tent, and have completely forgotten that, compartmentalized. God is faithless. Like he was faithful this morning, now he's faithless because I'm thirsty. And boy, I do it. That's a Seth thing. So quickly I'll forget God's provisions. I'll forget who God is and what he's revealed to me in his word and also experientially in my life. And I'll quickly go to, "Oh, woe is me. God has forgotten. He must not be." Like the problems are all around me, not me. Moses also was thirsty. It's you see the attitude there, right? The resentment, the bitterness. All right, 17:5. Keep it going. The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink." So Moses struck the rock as he was told. The water gushed out as the elders looked on. And again, I've seen the pictures, when you do this, like Moses hitting the stone, there's like this little crack and a little like water fountain, like 2.5 million people plus livestock. They all got water. This was, again, an explosive sort of thing. Like strikes the rock and this torrent comes out as a river. And later on in Psalms, it talks about that. It says water came gushing out like a river. I mean, it was enough to sustain all of the people. An impressive thing there. But again, we see God, because remember, this is God's story. God is presenting himself to us. And what I love is with the story of Israel, like I tend to, when I get caught up in the story, I'm like, oh, this is God's rescue mission. God is doing, SEAL Team 6 going in. He's saving his people. He's getting them out. There's no urgency with God. He's setting this up. He's taking these people and their needs and their problems and their whole story, and he's going to use it later on in Scripture as something like as a teachable moment, right? He's like, when I bring them out of Egypt and get them into their country, I'm going to do it in such a way that there will be life lessons, and I will be revealing myself to the rest of humanity through my interactions with Israel. And we see him taking them through these points. He's like, okay, I'm going to bring these people, my teaching aid, I'm going to bring them through. I'm going to bring them to a point where, look, they have need, I provide their need. They have a need again, I provide their need. I take care of my people. I am faithful. Here's something you can know about me, Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. I am a faithful God. I am a powerful God. I will sustain them. I will save them. These are my people. Just a cool thing. And we see it over and over. And that would be, because I would question, like, God, why are you dealing with people? Well, that's just what I want you to see. Here's undeserving people. Here's my grace. And look at undeserving people again, and here's my grace. And yes, they're my chosen people, but not on their merit. I didn't pick the best ones. They're just people. These are people, and it highlights God's character and God's qualities. And so I just had a couple thoughts, and I've shared them pretty much already, I think. But God's chosen to use these people as his representatives to the world, but they're severely limited in their usefulness to him by their lack of faith or their lack of belief. If you think about, to give him a little bit of credit, we have a lot more knowledge of Yahweh, the God of the Bible, than they did, right? They've got the promises from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which was passed down through oral history and stuff to them. They've got the plagues. They've got some stuff. They know less about God than I did, and that definitely impacted their relationship, right? They were very quick to not have truths about God that they could fall back on. Oh no, problems. Who is Yahweh? What can he help with this? I don't know. I can look at it like, oh yeah, look at all the things that God has done. They didn't have that, which then prompted me to think, okay, so am I setting myself up to be like the Israelites, right? 'Cause now I have options. I have available knowledge. I have God's testimony of himself. If I know this, and if I'm familiar with it, and if I have this in my head when I'm hit with those trials and those problems like the Israelites, and a time where I'm like, oh no, now there's this unknown, now there's this scary thing, now there's this problem in my life, will I fall back on truth from God's word, or will I be like the Israelites, and will I fall back on nothing, right? Am I not actually filling my head with truth from God's word so that when I get hit, I'm just like, oh no, from faith to faithless, that quick. Like, yay, God, you're the best, you provide. Oh, no, God, you're the worst, you're going to let us die. Like, I don't want to be that guy. But the reason they were there is they didn't really have a lot to fall back on. They're still babies in their understanding of who God was. And I would say for them, they didn't have much choice. There wasn't a lot given to them yet as far as life experience. It's been 2 months. But I don't want to go that route. Right? This is something that was written for my benefit, and I want to make sure that I'm actually benefiting from it. Am I setting myself up? Am I growing my understanding of who God is so that when trying times come, I have something to lean on? Or is it going to be one of those like, ever done a trust fall with somebody and they're not there? Don't want to do that. I want to be like, no, okay, God, you are there. I know you're there. And I can go with this. And then knowing that I have a tendency to focus more on the negative, what are the things in my life that I can look at now and see God's provision for me? I would do well to count my blessings regularly so as not to lose sight of God's grace in my life. And that's just for me. I was looking at, okay, I don't want to be I don't want, if someone were to look at the life of Seth later on and be like, man, look at that faithless guy. Like God blessed him and Seth was faithless. And God blessed and Seth was faithless. I'd like to be the other side of that. Like, hey, look, God was faithful and Seth remembered that. And then that motivated him to walk in more a life of faith. But that's an option set before me. That's something that's a daily choice of God, will I acknowledge what you've already done for me? And not to focus just on temporal things or like our physical blessings, but it was helpful for me to live amongst the Iski. You get to like survival level humanity. And so I'm like, man, I have running water in my home and I have food in my pantry. Like here's all of the just physical things I have that put me on like the top 5% of humanity every day. I mean, you start getting to, I have a vehicle, I have refrigeration, I have a TV. It's like, okay, there's so much for me to be thankful for. Like, wake up in the morning, okay, let me start my list of things that I can be thankful for. But then we don't want it to just, be compared to other people. Oh, I'm, type of thing. We want to get a little bit focus on more important things than that. But we got things to be thankful for. And I would say there's probably a human tendency to not really spend a whole lot of time in thankfulness. Like, intentionally thankful, I think that's a human thing. It's something for me, definitely. I tend to just accept goodness as the standard norm and then go on. But that gets us to, we're very close to Mount Sinai. We'll be getting there next week. We'll be getting into all the prep for that. And the week after is actually kind of a big one. We'll be hitting the law, which is, again, God really amping up, like, let me communicate to you in a very big way, or a very specific way, my thoughts.